It's hard to imagine anything scarier than that. Well, except maybe the things that go bump in the night. Oh yeah, so this is terrifying. Okay, let's take a deep breath. Let's go. The year before, a friend and I had taken Route 19, a deserted stretch of highway that cuts through the Allegheny Mountains in western Pennsylvania. We were heading back from Pittsburgh to State College after a Penn State football game, and the thought of spending 4 hours in bumper-to-bumper traffic on the turnpike made us decide to take the long way home. Now, even though it was well past midnight, we were both too excited to talk about the game to be scared. Then suddenly, my friend slammed on the brakes and yanked the car onto the shoulder. "What are you doing?" I screamed at him, startled by his sudden move. "I have to pee," he yelled back, scrambling out of the car, and as he relieved himself, I rolled down my window to take in the fresh night air. That's when I saw her standing on the shoulder of the road not far away from us. At first, I thought she was a young girl in a white dress, but as my headlights caught her face, I saw that she was older, her eyes glowing like a deer's caught in the headlights, except there was nothing alive about them. For a moment, all three of us just stared at each other. My friend, frozen with his pants around his ankles, the woman on the side of the road, and me, stuck between the two. And then she did something that made my blood run cold. She raised a hand, not in a waving motion, but with her palm out, fingers splayed, pointing toward the woods that bordered the highway. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. It was like watching a horror movie, except this was real life. My friend, regaining his composure, quickly zipped up his pants and got back into the car. Neither one of us said a word. We just sat there staring at the woman who stood motionless, bathed in the glow of our headlights. I rolled my window down and yelled out, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" But my question went unanswered. After what seemed like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes, the woman took another step forward, still with that hand raised. Then she turned and disappeared into the trees. My friend and I sat in stunned silence, neither of us daring to break the quiet. Then, shaking myself out of my stupor, I turned the car around and slowly drove back toward the place where we had seen the woman. As my headlights swept across the shoulder of the road, I saw the faint outline of a person, just a vague shadow. But when I stopped and got out of the car, there was nothing there. No footprints, no trace that she'd ever been there. Just the heavy, scary silence pressing down on me. I got back into the car and we sped off, both of us too frightened to speak. We didn't stop talking for the entire drive home. And even now, years later, the memory of that night still haunts me. Yeah, that dread and the fear that comes with it. You can almost feel it coming, like a cold shiver down your spine. Sometimes the scariest part is the things we can't see or hear. Yep, exactly. Like the darkness that's hiding something. Yeah, like something's lurking just out of sight. Have you ever experienced something like this? This is a scary story from a contributor. Have you ever seen a ghost? If you've seen a ghost, do you think they're trying to tell you something? Let me know in the comments below. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts. I've always been drawn to the paranormal, even as a kid. But it wasn't until I became a police officer that I realized the line between our world and the next is sometimes paper thin. As a small-town cop, I'm called to most things: break-ins, disturbances, the usual. But one day, dispatch sent me to an address I hadn't heard in years. It was the old farmhouse at the end of Widowmaker Lane. For as long as I could remember, the place had looked abandoned. Windows boarded up, yard overrun with weeds. Not a soul ever went there. Or so I thought. Locals whispered that sometimes strange lights could be seen coming from inside the house, but I never believed it. That was just a story to scare kids, or so I told myself. As I turned onto Widowmaker Lane, the rain picking up, I couldn't help but glance at the house. Dispatch said they'd gotten a call from a neighbor who'd seen what looked like a figure in the window. I figured it was probably just some college kids trying to get a peek at the supposedly haunted house. You know how that goes. But as I got closer, my heart started pounding. I don't get spooked easily, but there was something about this place. The way the wind twisted through the trees, the feeling that I was being watched. When I finally reached the house, I noticed something strange. The front door was open. I hesitated, then walked up the creaking steps and pushed the door open wider. The air inside was thick with the smell of mildew and rot. Dust coated everything, making the room feel like a tomb. I called out, "Hello, anyone there?" My voice echoed back at me, bouncing off the sagging walls. Then I heard it again, heavy footsteps, slow and deliberate, like someone pacing back and forth. I strained to listen, my heart pounding in my chest. Footsteps, then silence. I stepped into the hallway, my flashlight beam shaking as I tried to get my bearings. The place felt like a minefield of danger, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I moved deeper into the house, my flashlight cutting through the darkness, revealing nothing but dust motes dancing in the stale air. Then I saw it, or thought I did. A shadow, a dark shape against the faint light coming from down the hall. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. There at the end of the hallway stood what looked like a man. He was tall and thin, his shoulders stooped like he was carrying a heavy load. He seemed to be watching me, leaning over the railing, his face hidden in the shadows. I blinked, and in that instant, he was gone. I raced toward him, my flashlight beam slicing through the darkness, but there was no one there. I ran my fingers through my hair, feeling the sweat on my forehead. Was I imagining things? Was this some kind of elaborate prank? As I turned to leave, I heard a noise behind me. I whirled around, my heart pounding, but it was empty. The house was silent, the only sound the pounding of my own blood in my ears. I found no one else inside. The place was empty, or so I thought. I've investigated countless scenes in my career, some more traumatic than others. But the farmhouse on Widowmaker Lane was different. It wasn't the broken windows or the smell of decay that bothered me, but the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something unseen was sharing the space with me. As I stepped outside into the cold night air, I glanced back at the house. The silhouette of a man at the window, his face pale and drawn, staring out at me. I shook my head, dismissing what I must have imagined. That house still sits there, a looming presence at the end of Widowmaker Lane, a place where the veil between our world and the next is paper thin, a constant reminder that some doors are best left unopened, some secrets are best left undisturbed. This is the most frightening thing I've ever experienced. It was late at night and a report had just come in of a baby crying near Raven Hollow. For anyone who doesn't know, Raven Hollow is a stretch of woods that runs alongside the highway. It's a notorious area known for both wrecks and disappearances. I don't know how many people have gone missing in those woods, but there's a memorial just outside the entrance with crosses bearing the names of some of them. As I drove toward the entrance of the woods, my engine cut off and I heard it. In the distance, a baby crying. I couldn't see anyone, but the cry seemed to be coming from inside the woods. It was faint and thin, wispy even, like it was being carried by the wind. I got out of my car and started walking into the trees. The further I walked, the louder the crying became. Sometimes it sounded like it was behind me. Sometimes it sounded like it was ahead, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness. The woods were just a wall of black, impenetrable and silent except for the crying. And then my radio crackled to life. I froze, every sense on high alert. What was that noise? Was someone messing with me? I tried to make out the voice, but all I heard was static. I kept walking, trying to push the fear down. But the longer I walked, the worse it got. The trees seemed to be pressing in on me, their branches clawing at my skin. Their shadows danced around me, twisting and turning into grotesque shapes that seemed to mock my terror. And the crying, it was getting closer now, circling me, taunting me. My hand brushed against something cold and I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest. There was nothing there. Only the trees swayed gently in the non-existent wind, their leaves whispering secrets in a language I couldn't understand. I broke into a run, pushing aside the branches that reached out to grab at me. I stumbled and fell, scraping my hands on the rough ground. But I didn't care. I pushed myself up and ran again, my lungs burning, my legs screaming for me to stop. But I didn't dare. Not until I heard the crunch of gravel under my shoes, the sound of my own salvation. I burst out of the trees onto the highway, gasping for breath. The air in my lungs burned and my legs felt like they would collapse under me. I had made it out. I was safe. Or so I thought. Because as I turned to look back at the woods, I saw it. a small figure standing at the edge of the trees. It was tall and thin, like a twisted tree branch, and it was waving. One hand was raised in a mocking salute while the other clutched something that looked like a tattered piece of cloth. I stared, frozen with terror as it took a step forward, then another. The woods seemed to reach out, eager to claim me, and then it disappeared. I don't want to sound like I'm making this up. I know it sounds insane. But what I saw out there, it wasn't human. It was something twisted and evil. I never went back for that shift. I handed in my badge and left that town as fast as I could. Sometimes at night, when the wind is just right, I can still hear that baby crying. And sometimes in my nightmares, I can feel the cold, dead hand of the woods reaching for me, trying to drag me back into that endless night. I never faced anything like that in uniform, not a single day. And I hope to God I never do again. I was certain the old county jail was empty. The building had been abandoned for years, left to rot after a new prison was built just outside of town. But one winter night, I saw light flickering through a broken window on the second floor. Curiosity got the better of me, so the next morning I went to check it out. As I approached the jail, my boots echoed down the rusted, snow-covered stairs. Peeling paint made the place look like an old man's skin. Then I noticed a door on the far side of the building propped open by a rusty pipe. The last time I'd been in this jail was when I was 12 years old and my dad was a sheriff's deputy. He brought me along while he did some paperwork in the office, which was really just an unlocked room at the end of a long corridor. Back then, the place felt like a dungeon. And even though the door to the corridor was open, I remember feeling suffocated by the smell of stale waste and despair. Now, 30 years later, I stood at the same door. My reflection stared back at me from the glass pane set into the solid steel. What was I thinking? Getting spooked by an old abandoned building? There was nothing here but ghosts. But something inside me urged me forward, so I walked through the doorway. Before me stretched the holding block, 5 barred cells, each with a sink and a toilet and a heavy steel door. 4 of the cells were empty, their bars coated with a thick layer of dust. But the 5th cell, the one closest to the office, was wide open. On the bunk sat a man in an orange jumpsuit. His head was bowed, his shoulders shaking slightly. Maybe he was a staff member who'd come to collect something from the office. I figured I should probably say something, so I cleared my throat. "Hello?" My voice echoed through the empty jail and seemed to bounce off the bars of cell 6. The man on the bunk didn't budge. I took a step closer. "Hey, are you okay?" Still nothing. The hair on the back of my neck prickled. What was he doing in there? Why hadn't he closed the cell door? Or maybe he had, and it just blew open during the night. The wind rattled the bars, moaning through the gaps in the cell doors. It sounded like screams in the dark. I hesitated only a second longer before stepping into the cell. As I neared the bunk, I could see the man's chest rise and fall with each breath. But his face was still turned away, his hair a tangled mess, obscuring his features. I wasn't scared anymore. I was confused. If he was real, why didn't he acknowledge me? Or if he was a ghost, why did he smell like sweat and iron? Like a moth drawn to a flame, I reached out and touched his shoulder. He flinched, then slowly turned his head. His eyes were cloudy, vacant. He stared at me for what felt like an eternity, his gaze boring into my skull. Then he began to speak. His voice was a raspy whisper, like dry leaves crunching underfoot. "Who's there?" he rasped. "Who's in my cell?" His words echoed with a hollow ring. I recoiled as if struck. His question hung in the air between us, unanswered. Startled by my own naivety, I blurted out, "I thought you were a ghost." A flicker of something crossed his face, something akin to pain. "A ghost?" he repeated, his voice cracking. "No, I'm not a ghost." He paused, then added in a barely audible voice, "Not anymore." His words sent shivers down my spine. Who was he? How did he get in the cell? Why did he smell like a living person? 1,000 questions pounded in my head, but he didn't answer any of them. In fact, he didn't move at all. He just sat there staring at me with those soulless eyes. It was like looking into a bottomless pit. And then just as suddenly as he'd appeared, he vanished. The orange jumpsuit, The vacant eyes, the musky odor, all gone. In their place, a thick layer of dust lay undisturbed on the bunk. I don't know how long I stood there staring at the dust, but eventually I forced myself to turn and walk away. As I did, I glanced back over my shoulder. Cell 6 was empty, but the smell of sweat and iron lingered in the air. I rushed down the corridor and out the front door, not daring to look back. For a long time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I turned around, I half expected to see those vacant eyes boring into mine. To this day, I can't explain what I saw in that abandoned jail cell, but the memory of those vacant eyes and the smell of sweat and iron still haunts my nightmares. This spooky story comes from a terrifying 911 call that came in about 2 months ago. The caller was screaming. The line was filled with static. All I could hear was a man begging for help. The GPS coordinates placed the call here at Dead Man's Bridge. It's an old wooden structure spanning a creek that's only a few feet wide, but the locals say that if you cross it after dark, you'll never make it home. So naturally, that's when I decided to go. When I got there, it was deserted. The creek roared below the bridge, sounding like a hungry beast ready to swallow anyone who dared venture too close. I crossed the bridge. My flashlight swept the planks from side to side, revealing nothing but darkness and the looming shadows of the trees. I wasn't sure what to expect. Maybe a car accident, a fight, someone lost and stranded in the woods. But this far out in the county, we don't get many calls that require our assistance. And the ones that do are usually accompanied by flashing lights and the wail of sirens. This was silent except for the whispering wind and the rushing water. I reached the middle of the bridge when my radio, which had been silent up until that point, is alive with the same voice that had come over the line, so faint I could barely hear him. He was asking for help, but now he was closer. "Please, can somebody help me? Please, I need some help." I froze, listening for anything else, any sound at all. But the only response was the babbling of the creek. I didn't respond over the radio. I didn't have to. Whoever was out here knew that I heard him. The voice whispered again, this time my name. It was the same voice that had given the dispatch the garbled coordinates that led me here, the one that had called for help. "Hello? Is anybody there?" I kept my voice steady, though inside I was panicking. How could they know my name? Did they know where I was? Was this a setup? I tried to convince myself that it was nothing more than a prank. Kids messing around in the woods, trying to spook anyone who dared walk across the bridge after dark. But the voice on the other end of the radio didn't sound like it was coming from a teenager. There was something desperate, something pained in his voice that made my skin crawl. I continued making my way across the bridge, my eyes scanning the ground, searching for footprints, anything to indicate that I wasn't alone. But the forest floor was a tangled mess of roots and rocks and fallen leaves. Nothing out of the ordinary. I wanted to run, to get as far away from that bridge as possible. But I knew that whoever was out here was watching me, waiting for me to turn around, for me to run away. I kept walking, my boots heavy on the wooden planks. And then I heard it again, the sound that had brought me here. A whisper, my name, and it was close. I whirled around, my flashlight beam spinning wildly, but there was nothing there. Only the trees, their branches clawing at the sky, and the darkness, thick and heavy and alive. The voice spoke again, this time closer still. "Help me," it rasped, and this time I could hear the desperation in his voice. "Please, I need your help." The bridge groaned under my boots. It sounded like something heavy was crawling just beneath the planks. I broke into a run, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't dare look back. I didn't want to see what was behind me. I just wanted to get away. I made it to the other side and stumbled out of the trees onto the road. I didn't stop running until I was back at the station. I haven't been back to that bridge since, but sometimes at night I swear I can hear it. The whisper of my name on the wind, the heavy, slow breathing of something large and unseen, and the sound of my own footsteps as I run away. What's the most terrifying thing you've ever seen? Well, here goes. It was late summer and the stalks were already taller than my head. I was called to the edge of the cornfield on Old Pine Road. A neighbor had seen a small child wandering near the road and into the field. I stepped into the field and the stalks immediately rustled together like a coffin lid closing. But there was no wind. Then I saw him. He was barefoot, and his skin was as white as the moon. No more than 10 years old, he stood there staring at me with a fixed smile on his face. It was a terrible, terrible smile. It didn't fit his age, and it didn't fit the situation. It was the kind of smile you see on a decomposing corpse that has been left out in the sun too long. He took a step toward me, and then he was gone. I blinked, and he reappeared. "You're late," he whispered, his voice raspy like dead leaves crunching underfoot. And as he spoke, the corn rustled again, not like wind, but like something much larger than wind moving just out of sight. Something heavy and wet. Then he was gone again. He vanished into the stalks, and I stood there for a moment, my heart hammering against my ribs, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. Of course, I knew there was no sense to be made. There never is with things that go bump in the night. But still, I walked slowly into the field, calling out, "Hello there, is anybody there?" My voice echoed between the tall stalks, and the whisper of wind answered me. I shone my flashlight into the swaying green sea and strained to hear any sound, to see any movement. But there was nothing. Only the rustling of the corn and the chirping of crickets. I walked back to the road, climbed into my truck and drove home, my eyes constantly scanning the field, half expecting to see that boy with his fixed grin standing in the middle of the rows. I told my wife all about it. Every detail burned into my mind. The smile, the whisper, the rustling, the way the corn seemed to bend without any wind. We agreed that I should go back in the morning and look around, and so the next day I did. But of course, by then it all seemed foolish. What was I thinking? A kid in a cornfield. It's hardly a newsworthy event. Still, I went back. The sun beat down on my neck and I wiped the sweat from my brow as I walked. I wondered if I had imagined the whole thing, if stress and exhaustion had addled my brain. I found no tracks in the soft earth, no broken stalks or disturbed weeds, nothing to indicate anyone had ever been there. As I turned to leave, the sky darkened and fat raindrops splattered onto my face. Suddenly, I heard a splash in the field behind me. I whirled around and saw a lone figure wading through the knee-high water. The boy, he was in the corn. I stood there watching him. He didn't seem to notice me. He walked slowly and deliberately toward the center of the field where the stalks grew the tallest and thickest. And as he walked, the corn rustled like the sound of heavy breathing. He stopped, and I called out to him, "Hello, are you lost?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and stared directly at me. His eyes were black pits, and he opened his mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. He was grinning, that same terrible grin, and then he was gone. I blinked and the corn rustled again, and he was gone, vanished. I ran home, each footfall pounding in my ears. I haven't been back since, and every night I hear the corn rustling and I know he's out there, waiting for me with his terrible smile. That was a scary story, wasn't it, folks? Do you believe in ghosts? Well, I do now. Do you want to hear another ghost story? Well, here goes. Welcome to my channel. This is the scariest thing I've ever found in a graveyard. The sky split open with lightning as I passed the old Lutheran church on the outskirts of town. I didn't need to see the road up ahead to know that it was closed due to the storm, but something about the flickering light made me want to keep driving. So I pressed on, my headlights cutting through the deluge. Up ahead, I saw a figure kneeling by the graves out back. I slammed on the brakes and turned the wheel. By the time I climbed the hill, the figure was gone, and the only sound was the pounding rain. I got out and started walking toward the graves, my flashlight piercing the gloom. That's when I saw it, a freshly dug grave. The rain had made the soil slick, and it hadn't yet been filled in. My flashlight fell to the headstone at the foot of the grave. It was smooth and cold to the touch, obviously brand new. And the inscription sent a chill down my spine because it bore my last name. I never told anyone about this. To this day, I can't bring myself to speak of it, let alone show anyone. But sometimes in the middle of the night, it'll come back to me in vivid detail. The feel of the cold stone beneath my fingers, the smell of wet earth and the sound of the rain. It's like a horror movie soundtrack playing in my head on repeat. When I turned to leave, I noticed something even more disturbing. The grave wasn't the only thing that had been disturbed. Several others nearby had also been dug up recently, but there were no bodies or coffins in sight. They were just gaping holes in the ground. As I stood there mesmerized, the rain slowly began to abate. The clouds parted and a sliver of moonlight peeked through. That's when I saw them. 3 dark shapes huddled at the edge of the cemetery, almost blending in with the shadows. I froze, unsure what to do. Should I call out to them? Run away? The figures stirred and I could hear their voices, low and guttural. Then they started moving toward me, their eyes fixed on the grave. I didn't wait to find out what they wanted. I turned and ran as fast as I could, slipping and sliding on the wet grass. I could hear them close behind me, their footsteps heavy and deliberate. As I ran, I glanced back. The 3 figures were gaining on me, their faces now illuminated by the faint moonlight. I knew I wouldn't outrun them. Their cold, dead eyes seemed to bore into my soul. Suddenly, I tripped and fell, scraping my knee on the rough concrete. I tried to get up, but they were upon me in an instant. I screamed, scrambling backwards, but there was nowhere left for me to go. Then, just as quickly as they had appeared, they vanished. I sat there stunned, my heart pounding in my chest. When I finally looked back, they were gone. The only sound was the gentle lapping of water and the rustling of leaves. It felt like a lifetime, but it must have only been a few seconds. I struggled to my feet and ran as fast as I could from the cemetery, not stopping until I reached the safety of my car. As I drove away, I could still hear their voices whispering my name, calling me back to the cemetery. But I didn't listen. I kept driving until I reached home, where I locked myself inside and never told anyone about what I had seen. It's been years now, but I still can't shake the feeling that something evil is buried in that cemetery. Sometimes I think it might have been watching me, waiting for me to come back. What do you think? Was there something sinister at play, or was it just a figment of my imagination? Let me know in the comments below. There was an old barn on a neighbor's property, and every year a little more of it would collapse. So one autumn night I was home alone. My parents were out of town. There was a big storm out, and the power had gone out. And I was looking out the back window, and I saw this flash of movement in the loft window of the barn. Now, this is important to know about barns. They have these big sliding doors on the side for the animals to get in and out. But at night they close these big doors so that the animals are trapped inside, and also so that predators can't get in and eat the animals. But this door was shut tight, nailed shut. And yet I saw something move in the loft window. I don't know what compelled me to go out there. Maybe it was just morbid curiosity. It was a full moon and the wind was screaming, but I went out into the yard and started walking toward the barn. It was maybe 200 yards from my house to the barn. And as I got closer, I could hear this sound coming from the barn. It was very slow, heavy breathing, like someone or something was up there in the loft. The door was padlocked, but I easily found an old board that I could use to pry it open. As I pushed open the door, this wave of stale, rotten air hit me, the smell of mold and mildew and decaying hay. I pulled the board away and stepped inside. Now, this barn hadn't been used for years. It was just kind of a storage barn. My neighbor kept all of his old farming equipment in there, and it was filled with spiders and cobwebs and mice. It was disgusting. But this must have been where the noise was coming from. I climbed the ladder to the loft. The old wood groaned and creaked beneath me. I felt like it might collapse. It didn't seem like it should have been able to hold my weight. But as I reached the top of the ladder and turned around, I saw that there was nothing up here. There wasn't anything on any of the beams. There wasn't anything in the hay. There was just, everywhere I looked, just piles of black, dusty hay. And then I heard it again, that breathing, slow, heavy breathing. And I could feel the vibrations of whatever was up here moving around, shifting its weight. It was definitely up here somewhere. But there was nothing but hay bales. I started to get freaked out. What the heck was making that noise? Was it a bear? A mountain lion? What? I pulled my light out of my pocket and started shining it around. And that's when I saw it. I don't want to be too graphic, but basically there were these pale hands gripping the rafters. They were way too long. My blood ran cold. This thing was definitely up here watching me. Whatever it was, it didn't want me to see it because it stayed in the shadows and only its hands were visible. Then I saw its nails. Its nails were long and curved like talons. It started to shift its weight. I could see more of its body. It was emaciated, hairless. It looked like a skeleton. It looked terrible. And then it let go and it fell. I froze. I was terrified. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I stood there staring up at this thing as it came down through the hay. I was sure that it was going to come after me. It landed on the ground and it took a step toward me. It took one look at me, and then it turned and ran out the door into the night. Now, obviously, I haven't seen this thing since, but the barn has never really been the same. The silence is just filled with the memory of that horrible, heavy breathing. And sometimes I swear that if I listen really hard, I can hear it scratching and clawing at the wood up there in the loft.